really interesting and unique talk, a thread of the austerity agenda and economics and democracy that we don't normally get exposed to, and that is monetary reform. So we've got George, so wonderful that he can share his knowledge and his passion today of his multi-decade work on monetary reform. George has been sitting on the Committee for Monetary Reform and Economic and Monetary Reform.
The Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform, COMER, based in Toronto. Yeah.
Cool. Since 1994, and George from 1968 until 1996 was a professor at the Religious Studies Department at U of Windsor, working in social ethics. And through that time and in the 90s, George began to look very seriously at money. So here he is today sharing his writing, his research, his passion for this topic and how it fits into the big picture. George is also a longtime member of the Council of Canadians, investing a lot of energy locally and throughout the region for justice, and he's worked with lots of ecological groups. So it's great to have an elder in our community sharing this very particular piece with us today. And I want to say a special thanks to Sarah, George's daughter here, who has come out from California to just for today. And is able to hear her father's passionate work. I also want to thank London Community News for coming out today as well for press. And here we are, George.
Okay, well, the topic I'm dealing with, our money system, is almost completely unknown by almost all of us. It's one of the most powerful issues influencing our everyday life, and yet we are almost completely ignorant of its presence in our lives. Let me start off not by talking about the money system, but first let me just emphasize the austerity agenda that's being forced down our throats now. As you know, of course, governments are in debt, and they're claiming that the only way they can deal with this debt is through cutting our social programs or privatizing public services so that they're no longer a burden on the public. An alternative possibility would, of course, be to raise taxes on the rich, the taxes that have been cut considerably over many years, but this alternative hardly gets any recognition at all. Now, both of these measures, cutting social programs and raising taxes, are in the area of fiscal policy. This is not monetary policy. But let me say, first of all, even in the area of fiscal policy, we're being deceived, and the notion that austerity can work is entirely mistaken. Austerity does not work and cannot work. When a government says that it's going to save $1 billion by cutting a whole bunch of jobs, it's deceiving us, because it loses the taxes that those people pay. And not only that, it loses the spending that those people do in the community that supports other people who are paying taxes. So the austerity agenda can only drive the economy down more and more. There are examples of government spending that even show a positive outcome. For example, in Quebec, the child care program, when Quebec invested a dollar for each dollar that Quebec invested in this program in 2008, it got back $1.04 from the the total economic impact spreading out in the community and the taxes coming back to the government. And not only that, the federal government got another 43 cents for every dollar that Quebec spent without spending any money itself at all. So government spending can produce a lot of benefit within the community and works quite in the opposite direction from austerity. Now, not always does government spending produce a surplus. And there are cases where governments have to borrow in order to support spending. This is where monetary policy comes in, and I'll come back to that. But first, let me go approach the money system in an elementary way, right at the beginning. What is money anyway? What are we talking about when we speak about money? We're all familiar with cash, the coins and bills that we carry with us. The bills, it used to be just of paper, but now are turning out to be of plastic as well. We had plastic before that with credit cards and debit cards. We're familiar with that, but cash that we carry in our pockets is only a very small part of the total amount of money that's in circulation. We're all familiar with the fact that large transactions, even moderately large transactions, are handled primarily through the writing of checks or the transfer of money electronically through computers. And our banking system manages the transfer of monies in our society. Now, money, of course, is essential for the functioning of any complex modern economy. It facilitates economic transaction, and it's it's absolutely essential, an essential part of our economic life. So where does this money that's mostly recorded by the banks in computers, where does this money originate? Where does that come from? Now, most people answer this question by saying that the government creates the money. Now, this is not the case. This is one of the first things that we need to recognize. The money that we have circulating in our economy that we're all dependent upon has not been created by the government. Well, where does it come from then? The 97% of the money that we depend on for daily transactions has come into being through the normal process of banks making loans. Now, when the banks make these loans, they create money out of nothing. This is the mind-blowing fact about our money system. We do not have a money system that is based on gold or any other commodity in any way. And this is not a bad thing. That part of it is not a bad thing. If we did rely on gold, there'd be all kinds of problems. Gold is insufficiently available to take care of the growth of economies and expanding as expanding economic activity occurs. And then also banks can manipulate the gold for their own advantage in many ways, as they have again and again in the past when money systems have been based on gold. So I'm not recommending a return by any means to the gold standard. But the fact that we depend upon money that's created by banks in their process of making loans is the source of enormous difficulty for us. Now, this is the routine functioning of our economic system. There have been abuses of our financial system that occurred in 2008 with which we're all familiar. And we're familiar with the fact that the Federal Reserve bailed out the banks with huge creation of trillions of dollars, and the wealthy banks used those for bonuses and for buying out other banks and so on. Frightful abuse of our financial system. But I'm not talking about that primarily now. I'm talking about the routine functioning of our money system that has become widely accepted, and even that is enormously damaging to us. Why is it? Now, the next thing I'm going to say is perhaps the most important thing that I have to communicate. When banks create our currency by making loans, they only create principal. They do not create the interest that they require to be paid on those loans. They create principal, but not interest. Now, what's the implication of this? Just think about this. First of all, everybody is dependent upon this this money that's in circulation, that's come into being as the banks make loans, and only principal has been created by the banks. But those who have borrowed have to get out and scramble in the economy to get money that's been created as principal to pay back both principal and interest. Meanwhile, they're competing to use that money with people who don't owe anything at all, as well as with everybody else who does owe something. This means that there's always a shortage of money available out there to meet the demands of the banks. The banks, the demand that's always there, and it's we're never relieved of its presence. We have what I would call a debt money system. Our money carries with it the requirement that interest be paid at all times. And this sets us in competition with each other. It undermines cooperation. It undermines this community. Now, there are other consequences from this as well. This money system actually helps to contribute toward inflation. Businesses have a variety of expenses, and among them is the requirement that they pay interest on money they have borrowed. Businesses can hardly function without going into debt at one time or another. And so in order to get enough money to pay the interest plus their other expenses and to grow and have profits, they do all they can to push up prices as much as possible. And then workers who, with prices being inflated, workers press as much as possible to raise their wages to keep pace with inflation. And workers lately, as everybody knows, have not been doing so terribly well, as the corporations and governments now are trying to prevent workers from raising their wages, and they're trying to cut back as much as possible. So we have a situation in which inflationary pressures come from our debt money system. And then not only that, recession is inevitable in this system. Where are you going to get money to pay back not only principal but interest when money's been only been created as principal? It puts pressure on people to do more borrowing from the banks, which are the primary creators of money, in order to pay their interests as well as the principal. And this simply puts creates more debt into society, and it's obviously unsustainable. So inevitably, people start defaulting, and as defaults increase and there's a cascade of defaults, then the economy is driven into recession. Now, it's interesting to note that economists talk about the routine business cycle. You know, they say the business cycle is normal and natural in capitalist societies. But they don't, I don't know any of them that attribute this business cycle to the fact that the banks only create principal and not interest, inevitably driving the economy into recession. Then there are additional consequences to this money system. Obviously, the power that the banks exercise in creating money creates inequality. When we borrow money from the banks, we have to put up perfectly good collateral that they require of us before they'll make their loans. The banks are able to create out of nothing the money to lend us, and they require that we put up and make available to them, in case we can't pay them back, some very substantial wealth, some real wealth that they're in a position then to take over. And when we have a money system that inevitably goes into recession, the banks are able to foreclose on the wealth that the people put up as collateral for their loans. So when the economy is expanding, the banks collect interest, happily collect interest on the loans, interest that they have not created, that people have to scramble for. And then when the economy is in recession, they foreclose on the property that they have taken as collateral. And this, of course, concentrates wealth and power increasingly in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Those who are especially vulnerable economically inevitably lose out in a situation like this. And the fact that there's been an enormous increase of inequality in our society is largely an inevitable result of this money system. And it's also a result of the fact that the wealthy are not taxed adequately in any way. All right, then there's another consequence of this money system. If people don't go into debt, then we don't even have any money. Our governments have huge debts. In the U.S., we hear about the $16+ trillion that the U.S. government owes. Now, if the government responsibly paid back all of that money, you know, it makes good sense to think in terms of their paying back that money and not having to owe anything at all. Then that money would go out of existence altogether. And it would lead to a vast collapse of economies, not only in the U.S., but right around the world. If we don't have debt, we simply don't have money in this system. The heroes of our economic system are people who are spendthrifts and who borrow too much. They're the ones who keep money in circulation. We're told, people like that are treated with contempt because they aren't very responsible. They're told that they should save and pay back and pay off their debt. But the fact is that our economy is totally dependent on having this debt out there in order for the economy to function. So here's another serious problem. No debt, no money. Another consequence, as businesses struggle to find sufficient money to keep growing and to pay off the interest, then they exploit increasingly the finite resources of our ecological system. As we all know now, we live in a finite planet that has limited resources, and we simply cannot permit unlimited exploitation of resources, renewable or non-renewable. And yet our money system helps promote unlimited economic growth. There is a widespread assumption that's almost totally unquestioned, and that is, in order to deal with our economic problems, including austerity, we have to have growth. We've got to return to growth, they say over and over again. But this fails to recognize the fact that we aren't dealing with the finite limits of our global ecological system. And the money system is a primary contributor to the unsustainable exploitation of our environment. All right, then another problem that comes from this debt money system, and that is that our governments are borrowing money at interest from private banks and other private money lenders. In Canada, governments at all levels across Canada spend at least $60 billion every year currently in interest. Now this is an item in the budget that's almost never mentioned. When they talk about cutting social programs and saving money in the government, do they point to the interest that they're paying? Almost never. Do you hear anything about that? I haven't seen anything about that in the news. I don't recall ever seeing that in the normal media. Governments are borrowing from private banks that are able to create money out of nothing and then collect interest from governments. And then there are other private money lenders as well, especially wealthy bond holders who lend money to government and also charge interest on it. Now, here's where there is some hope. These interest requirements are totally unnecessary. It would be entirely possible for the governments, for our governments, to be creating money out of nothing itself, and making this money available to all levels for public expenditures, interest-free. We could be saving in Canada, first in Ontario, we'd save $10 billion every year. At the federal level, about $30 billion every year. And this would enormously free up our governments in order to provide adequate funding for all kinds of public services. When you talk about this issue, this is probably the best point at which to begin. We need a different money system, one in which our governments can provide interest-free money for all levels of government. Now, in Canada, we have the Bank of Canada. This was founded back in the 1930s, nationalized in 1938, and the Bank of Canada played the role of creating money out of nothing, successfully to get us out of the Depression and to carry through our responsibilities during World War II. And then, remarkably, for 30 years during the post-war period, up until the mid-1970s, our federal government was using to a considerable degree the powers of the Bank of Canada to provide interest-free loans. And this enabled Canada to build a remarkable infrastructure and to build up our social programs, including our enviable medical programs. And this was done with very little in the way of inflation. This is a remarkable achievement, but always the banks are manipulating, the private banks are manipulating behind the scenes in order to enable them to control the money system as much as possible. And they succeeded in convincing governments that governments should be borrowing at interest from them somehow during the 1970s. And so we've had government debt increasing ever since that time. We had severe austerity measures forced on us in the mid-1990s, and we're going through a similar period now as a result of this. This is unnecessary, and this is the heart of what we need to understand when we think about monetary policy. Let me put it a little differently in another way. Whoever gets to benefit from the first use of newly created money gets a free benefit. It's comparable to counterfeiters successfully passing off cash that they have created. This gives them a free benefit. Well, whenever money is created out of nothing, whoever gets the benefit from its first use gets a free benefit. Who's getting that benefit now? The private banks. They've managed to work things so that they're the ones who benefit. They tell us that there's no such thing as a free lunch. They're getting incredible free lunches all the time as a result of the money system that they dominate. Now this power to create money out of nothing, which gives a free benefit, is a benefit that should be shared by all of us. We all need money in order to carry out economic transactions. It seems to me it's quite obvious. This is a benefit that we should all be sharing in. The possibilities here are really quite astounding. Just imagine that our governments were able to borrow interest-free for all their infrastructure projects. So instead of paying for roads and bridges and buildings 2 or 3 times over with the interest payments, we pay for them just once. Say you have a project that has a lifetime of 30 to 50 years. You pay 1/30 or 1/50 of it out of taxes every year, and instead of having to pay 2 or 3 times that amount. When it's amortized by the banks, they charge most of their interest up front anyway. So